Hello, everyone. Welcome back to See the Invisible, Living with an Invisible or Rare Disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking some time out to listen today. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. To give you an idea of what I hope to do with the podcast is I want to try to lend support and have an active voice and positive voice for those that have an invisible or rare disease, which usually are chronic illnesses as well as support the caregivers and loved ones of those who have these illnesses. I know everything that's been going on, especially this past year to year and a half, there's been a lot of challenges that everyone has had to face. And when compounded with having an underlying condition or illness, it has been making things more difficult than previous times. So I just wanted to show people that you're not alone, and even though everybody's individual circumstances may be different, there is some commonality that we all have and can try to support each other. What I try to do with each episode is usually I've come across articles or websites. I do a lot of reading about not only my particular illness, but things that are going on in healthcare themselves. I just want to relay the information I'm finding, provide an opinion sometimes, but I do always just want to emphasize that I am not a medical, insurance, or legal expert. So whenever you do have questions in those fields, please make sure that you're reaching out to the appropriate person so that you get the best and most accurate answer. Also, this podcast is not intended to be a replacement for medical advice. Again, just please make sure that you're reaching out to the appropriate person if you have any questions or concerns. So I've been covering a series of episodes on asthma, and asthma and allergies can be closely related because sometimes allergies can trigger asthma attacks. But what I'm looking at today more specifically is the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it addresses asthma and allergies. I actually had a great conversation this morning with a representative from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. And I do use their site quite frequently, not only for episodes, but just also for my own information. So it's a really great site. I always link my sources in the description of my podcast, so you'll have that information there about what I'm covering today. But the conversation was really, great. It was kind of eye-opening that some of the things that I'm thinking about, there are other people who are thinking about the same or similar things and items that really need to be addressed. So I will be doing an episode more on the conversation that he and I had today and go over some of the things that we as a society can try to improve upon so that our legacy can be leaving this world in a better place to, address the needs. I'm looking at my children, my potential grandchildren, and trying to make sure that the groundwork is laid to make sure that they don't have to go through some of the challenges that we may have. So I've been working on the ADA episode, and there was a question that did come up, and thankfully I did get an answer from the gentleman that I spoke with this morning. So once I get into that a little bit more, I'll go through what we discussed as far as that goes. But one of the misconceptions about asthma and allergies, there tends to be like a very polar opposite. You may have some people who, since they cannot see specifically any symptoms all the time, that they kind of, push away the fact that allergies or asthma can be debilitating at times. So you have the one end or spectrum of the people who may not take asthma and allergies seriously. Then you have another end of the spectrum where some people may think if you have asthma or allergies, you're not able to get out and, enjoy the outdoors, to go on recreational activities. And it's really just, it's in between. It's not a illness that would always fall in one of those different stereotypes. There can be ranges of the severity of the symptoms, and we want to address those misconceptions that either, it's not a big deal, or that those who have these illnesses can't do or shouldn't do things that we want to. And that's, not right, for one thing, but that's what the ADA hopes to address. And personally, I find it, hard that there actually has to be a regulation from the government to say that there cannot be discrimination against those with disabilities. So it's kind of disheartening. But at the same time, it does leave the door open for discussions and education. So as far as why or how allergies and asthma are considered disabilities under the ADA, is quoting from the AAFA website. It's a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that seriously limits one or more major life activities, or who is regarded as having such impairments. So what this means is if something diminishes any major life activity, it's considered a disability. And one of the areas listed under or in the website as a major activity was breathing. And in a way, you look at it and it's like, well, that's a basic function of our bodies, but that's what asthma and allergy can prohibit. That can block us from being able to breathe properly. Some of the other activities are the ability to work in an environment that is opening, welcome, and does accommodate our needs. Education for children, not being left out of certain things, being able to do the things that they want to with their friends and classmates. I think as a child, if there's any type of I guess you would say calling out of them or their illness, it can be very traumatic. Even as an adult, when I was in college, there was this class. If it had a name today, it would be called adulting, but it was really a class to try to introduce us to living on our own, even though we were at college. The nurse practitioner came in to discuss getting the flu vaccine and how important it was. But at the time, I was considered allergic under the requirements of the flu vaccine. There was a component in there that I couldn't have. The nurse knew this, and she looked right at me and said, was explaining why it's important to have a vaccine, and that it not only protects the individual who has it, but also safeguards those who are not able to get the vaccine. And she looks right at me and asks me if it's okay if she tells the class that I'm allergic to the flu vaccine. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, by that point, she's already asked me. My roommate knew I was allergic, but, no one else did. And while it's not something that, I'm necessarily embarrassed about, it was kind of a shock to have a medical professional call me out in the middle of a class. And I've always been very lucky in that, whether was grade school, high school, college, and employment, that I've had very supportive colleagues. So, and being in college, people, even though we were young, were more mature than, say, elementary school or middle school. But just having that minor experience, and being an adult and being able to handle things a little better, it was still kind of like, okay, I kind of cringed when she did that. So, having children myself, I'd hate to see that they are left out of anything. So one of the examples that was given is, say if there's an event and the teacher is afraid of using an epinephrine pen, and for that reason they want to block the child from going on or participating in the activity. That is not allowed. So that, if that happens, we need to address that as, teaching the teacher in that case, or whether it's an employer, just whoever's prohibiting us from being able to do something. That's where the ADA falls in and says that we are protected. Now, some of the places that are considered public, which is covered by the ADA, is things such as theaters, restaurants, basically public buildings. The only ones that aren't covered are it's a private dwelling, or it's owned by a club that's private, something like that. It's listed also as non-religious private schools have to have accommodation. So as it falls under, if there's a religious private school, it doesn't fall under the ADA. And another interesting fact is that if an organization receives money from the federal government, they have to abide by the ADA as well. And a lot of times it's more employment to a degree, in that everybody wants to be able to have the same opportunities to get out there and have a career, be able to earn. And sometimes if there's something that's prohibiting us in a workplace, we want to have it addressed. And I would say that most people are usually pretty receptive. They want to have an open discussion and looking at all aspects, whether it's a business making an accommodation for their customers or an employer making an accommodation for their employee. It comes down to the business is a business. And if one is a store or restaurant that does not have accessibility, then they know they're going to lose customers. Not only those who can't get into the building properly or be able to enjoy their dinner properly, but word of mouth will get out. So they definitely want to address it. The same with the employer in those aspects, but also they wouldn't want to lose a valued employee if something can be resolved. Now, the only time accommodations may not be covered is if it's going to do what's called an undue hardship. And what that means is, say if it's a small business and the way that they would need to accommodate someone would mean that they'd have to do construction or maintenance on their building that is cost prohibitive. I've read of a case where there were a number of people that worked in a rather cramped place, and because of the accommodation this person needed, there was no way to actually fit that in the area that they worked in, and it actually created a danger to other people who were working around there. So in that case, it was a small business. That's one thing, because they don't have as many financial resources, but there was also the limited space, which could actually cause a danger to other employees. So that would be considered an undue hardship. Something like maybe putting up a partition or, changing the location of a desk, those types of things can be easily addressed. I know in my experiences as well, we sometimes had, perfumes or colognes that were extremely strong, and, other employees, including myself, did find that difficult to have around, and that was addressed, and people were asked not to wear perfumes and strong colognes. My doctor's office even had a policy that we had to sign saying that we would not wear colognes or perfume into visits. So those are the resolutions that we're talking about. That really doesn't cost anything. It doesn't do anything harmful. It's not an undue hardship. It's something that can be easily resolved. So what I discussed this morning is there can be certain instances where the ADA kind of butts heads against itself. There's an internal conflict. And one of the examples that I see most often, and what I think about most often, is if someone has severe asthma or allergies and they're in the same location as a service dog or service animal, and that can trigger allergies and hence an asthma attack in some people. What happens when both are in the area at the same time? And unfortunately, there's not a direct answer in the ADA, but what it does state is the person with a service animal does take priority or precedence. And personally, myself, I definitely understand that. Having a service animal is essential. I know that some service dogs actually can detect seizures that are coming on. So it's a very important resource for those who need service animals. It's really an extension of what they need in order to get around to public buildings and things like that. So myself, I would always defer, whether it means I need to go to a different part of the building, or something like that. But in cases of traveling, especially an airplane, that can be more difficult. And I will actually be doing an episode in the next couple of weeks on traveling while you have asthma or allergies, because that's always been a very big thing for me, is not only my allergies but addressing other people's too. Like if I'm going out and I'm taking snacks, I don't take anything that has peanuts in it or any type of nut, because I don't know who I'm going to be around. And even though I don't have those allergies, I know that a lot of people do, and it's severe. So I try to look at every aspect of it. So again, the priority or precedence would take the service animal. But there is a difference between a service animal and emotional support animal. So some places are able to crack down a little bit more, such as some airlines are kind of cracking down on the emotional support animals. Of course, the service animals would always be, welcome onto the planes, but it's, those who, are coming on with sometimes exotic pets as an emotional support animal. And while they are very important to a lot of people, it's different than the actual need for a service dog to be able to get around. And just speaking from experience, I have been in buildings at times where a dog wasn't even anywhere near me, and I knew it. It's because the air filtration or the circulation of air, it's shared throughout the building, so that all circles around. But that is something that has the potential of being in conflict. Now, hopefully, if there was a situation where that came up, whether it was at work or say staying at a hotel, which is one of the examples that we spoke about this morning, we would hope that there would be some type of accommodation they could make for us in order that we would not be negatively impacted by that dander or having that allergy, because of course we also don't want to go into an asthma attack. But it would be interesting in seeing how that's addressed possibly in the future. Now, if you do come across someone or a business employer who is not following the ADA, there are things that we can do to make sure that it's addressed. I know personally, even though I do find confrontation uncomfortable, I have been able to approach and address situations with people, and again, usually very receptive, because they want to make sure they're keeping their employment base, or they're keeping their customers happy. I think part of it is making sure that everybody respects each other. I know there's going to be some people that if we were to try to address something that's not ADA compliant, that they may get upset and not be very receptive, but I think that the majority are. And we just approach it with respect. A teacher that I had in high school, I'm going to paraphrase here, but this has always stuck with me, is that if you're having a discussion and you want someone to respect your opinion, the first thing that you need to do is respect theirs. So make sure that you have a good open discussion. Don't become defensive. Make sure that you're showing the appropriate respect for their situation while you're having the discussion. So I've always found that to be kind of a motto that I go by, not just in these types of situations, but in almost anything. So when you do get to a point, though, if someone's not, following the ADA and you need to file a complaint or start an investigation, I will include links on or in the description of the podcast in order for you to go on there and both find out more information as well as the link to start the investigation. Now, as I've said in previous episodes too, is even though I'm covering something specific today, such as asthma and allergies, a lot of the things that we discuss can be used in or with other illnesses. So just because today I'm talking about ADA compliance with asthma and allergies, it is good to know the definition and what resources we have if they're not being followed. And if you do see something and observe something, we need to make our voices heard. We need to speak up, and I am using the word need, not I want, but I'm using the word need specifically because I do want to see improvements made. I want to make sure that everybody feels valued. I have had things said to me that I'm just going to leave it as they were quite negative, including reactions to the fact that I was allergic to dogs. I mean, just very, very hurtful things. And 3 years ago, probably I wouldn't have spoken up. But now I am, because for as many strides as we've made, there are still things out there that we need to do, that we need to bring awareness to certain things. Coming up in upcoming episodes, we'll be talking about disparities in healthcare. And while it's great that these are being recognized, now it's time to do something about them. During my conversation earlier today, I was discussing, is education the key? And he responded, not just education, but motivation. If, 10,000 people have information, but nobody acts on it, it's not serving its purpose. And, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss things, to be able to even have access to the information. Because 50 or 60 years ago, with having a rare illness, I wouldn't be able to find out as much about it. Even with my doctors, most are not familiar with the illness that I have. I more than once have had someone say, I Googled your illness, or I looked that up on WebMD, and my thought is, okay, great. But it's rare, so it's limited to be able to find someone who can actually address those needs. But just because, I do have access to this information, and I feel, lucky to be able to look things up when I need them, it's now, to a point that I can see that things really aren't where they need to be. So as individuals, we can speak up, we can educate, even just one voice. If it helps one person, then it's well worth it. And that's how I look at everything in moving forward, is it takes one person to start. And we can all keep moving forward and advocate for ourselves, advocate for our loved ones, and advocate for our future. So that, again, our kids and grandkids don't have to go through all of the struggles that we may have had. And then looking at previous generations, they have had even more struggles. So, it's, with with humans, it's just always an evolution on, what we know, how we act on what we know, and really progressing as a society. And I'm very glad for the strides that we've made. And now it's time to take that, information and act on it. So, there are resources on the AAFA page, also about advocacy. So I'll make sure all of those are linked there. But, again, I'm using the word we need to speak up. That need is used purposely because it's not something we can just kind of sit on if we see something that is not compliant. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's episode. Upcoming, I will be looking again, at travel. If you have allergies and asthma, about children in schools, and asthma and some of the strides made there, because the articles I've read, it's very promising that children are now able to keep life-saving devices with them in some states. Previously, a lot of states, there were no requirements or it wasn't addressed, and schools, some of them would have the nurse handle, say, epinephrine pens or inhalers, and that could create a very big hardship on someone who's having an asthma attack or an allergy or allergic reaction that they need that EpiPen right then. But I'm getting a little too much on another topic. That's going to be a whole other episode. But, but it is something that I'm pretty passionate about, and, trying to let people know, first what they're doing right, what's been addressed and what's been corrected, and, finding ways then for those things that aren't quite right, being able to adjust them, and, making sure that everybody has the same accessibility. And there will also be an episode on accessibility as well of healthcare in general. That'll be upcoming. So also, I know that I've been talking about my father recently and some of his health problems. He is now out of the rehabilitation center. He's home and he is doing great for an 87-year-old man that had to undergo 2 major surgeries in like a 48-hour period. I think he's doing better than I would, and I'm 43 years younger, so he's really doing good, and just a world of difference from this time last month. So I just kind of wanted to give an update there since I'd been discussing that. And again, I hope that everybody got a little bit something out of this episode, even if it's just hearing that someone else is going through a similar situation. I hope to talk to everyone next week, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Bye.